Hello and welcome to Stand in the Gap, where Isaac Crockett and I tackle the most important issues affecting you, the American citizen, the American family, the American governmental system, and the American church. Now today on this program, our theme is going to be America's moral compass, broken or just discarded. In this program, we're going to address such questions as this. As a shining city on the hill, is it possible that America could have led the free world in generations past without a defined moral compass? Does America have a moral compass today? And if so, who determines what's moral? Can America and individual Americans survive without an agreed-to moral standard? And of course, can a reliable moral compass exist without moral absolutes and a firm belief in God? We're going to deal with this critical issue today on Stand in the Gap because not only does the future of America depend upon how this issue is understood, but the eternal future of every person watching this program right now hinges on how this issue is resolved. So far, we've dealt head-on with such issues as immigration and open borders, gun control, God and the Second Amendment, the opioid crisis, how to successfully bridge the racial divide, and most recently, with all due respect, restoring civility to politics and society. And you can watch all of these by going to our AmericanPastorsNetwork.net website or Stand in the Gap TV on YouTube. But on this program, we don't just talk around issues, we go to the root problem, looking through a four-phase lens of a biblical worldview which recognizes these four essential truths. First, there is God. Secondly, there was a creation, an act of God. Thirdly, there was a fall where sin entered the world precipitated by the devil. But lastly, there is redemption secured by Jesus Christ. So if you want to know the truth, if you want a solution that's guaranteed to work, if you want to know what God thinks, stay with us for the next 30 minutes as together we walk through the darkness of today's seemingly unsolvable dilemmas into the light and the freedom of moral truth. Well, from the man on the street to the corporate boardroom to the halls of government, from education to politics, from the individual to the family to the church, morality, standards, expectations for acceptable societal behavior, all of these are dealing with, or maybe should I say, wheeling and turning in confusion with how to respond and survive in a society that's effectively thrown off moral restraints. Now, according to a Gallup research report conducted in May of 2017, Americans' opinions about moral acceptability of certain practices has been undergoing massive change. In this survey, measuring change in the attitudes of American, certain categories identified as high indicate significantly increasing levels of acceptance in these areas. They accept these issues I'm going to identify right now as moral. They include birth control, sex between unmarried men and women, gay and lesbian relationships, having a baby outside of marriage, doctor-assisted suicide, watching pornography, and even polygamy. The clear point is that morality, the definition of morals, the need for it in society, and clearly who determines morality is changing. An agreed-to moral compass in America may well be a thing of the past, but the implications are staggering. We're going to talk about it in just a moment with special guest Dr. Alex McFarland, speaker, author, and advocate for Christian Apologetics, also the director of Christian Worldview and Apologetics at the Christian Worldview Center of North Greenville University in Greenville, South Carolina. So stay with us as Isaac Crockett and I talk with Dr. Alex McFarland on the theme, America's moral compass, broken or just discarded?
Truth, flexible or permanent? The Bible, ancient history or powerfully relevant? Culture, a reflection of enlightenment or warning signs? The pastor, commentator or frontline combatant? Every day, American Pastors Network speaks to these questions where and when they matter. with hundreds of affiliate radio stations nationwide. A website and mobile app screening today's headlines through the twin lenses of the Bible and the Constitution. And a growing network of statewide chapters leading the conversation in cities, small towns, and state capitals. Educating, informing, equipping. This is the American Pastors Network. The time is now to stand in the gap for truth.
Well, welcome back to Stand in the Gap. I'm Sam Rohrer and Isaac Crockett with me. And Isaac, before we bring in our special guest, Dr. Alex McFarland, we just had that clip up from the Gallup poll survey. Now, I want to ask you a question, if I can. You are a millennial. You are a pastor. You've been involved in public education. You've taught in social services. You've traveled a lot. So your perspective is very valuable as we look at that. What were your overall thoughts when you saw those changing attitudes towards mentality or towards morality in that graph?
Well, Sam, I can say that I was saddened to see those, but I was not shocked. And as I've traveled in other countries, I feel like they have, many of the other countries I've been in, they have a moral standard that we don't. But just dealing with youth here in America, especially in our public schools, when they talk their mind to you, when they speak the way they normally talk to each other, you realize that they question anything, any kind of truth. Who gives you the right for that? And there really is a lack of moral, even understanding of what morality should be.
Even to the extent of the importance of morality, if they can even define it, right?
Right.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. I want to right now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to bring in our special guest right now, Dr. Alex McFarland. He's a speaker, he's an author, he's a Christian apologist, director of the Christian Worldview and Apologetics at the Christian Worldview Center at North Greenville University in Greenville, South Carolina. Alex, thank you for being with us today.
Well, it's a great honor. Thank you all for having me.
I want to ask your opinion on what we just saw on that graph, because you're out there, you're going across the country, you're speaking to tens of thousands of millennials, you've preached in over 1,500 churches, you're involved to a great deal. When you saw that Gallup graph, in those things, I mean, we have seen other graphs. George Barna has done work too, which indicates a lot of those same things. But from your perspective as a student of culture and Christian apologetics, what does it say about a culture, our culture specifically in America, when we see these kinds of dramatic changes in how people are viewing the most basic of moral issues?
Well, it concerns me deeply, both as a Christian and as a citizen. The abandonment of belief in moral truth concerns me as a Christian because people can't be saved unless they recognize their own sin and admit that they're a sinner, guilty in the eyes of God. They need forgiveness. They're willing to repent. That means to turn from sin to Christ. So I'm very concerned as a believer because people can't be born again unless they admit that they've broken God's law and need forgiveness. But Sam, I'm concerned as a citizen because the abandonment of morality, the creation, in fact, the insistence on a moral vacuum, I believe really endangers the future of our U.S. Constitution and therefore endangers our rights and our liberties.
All right, well, you made that very clear, and that was why I mentioned at the beginning, there's an eternal factor here in regard to morality. You mentioned that, but there's also a great tie-in. Can our nation survive in the absence of a defined moral standard? Which brings us to the logical question of, well then, who defines morality? If you don't mind, let me just show a brief clip here right now of this was a news clip from RT News. It's a Russian-dominated news service, and I don't show it because of that, but I show it because as an international news source, they're looking into America and they're seeing what Gallup saw, and I just want to show this brief clip and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
With so much chaos and confusion these days, many Americans are looking for a new source of moral guidance. So, who should it be?
I think that's tough. I think the founding fathers have a lot of inspiration there.
Donald Trump is the moral compass.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Jimmy Carter.
You like Jimmy Carter?
Yes.
A lot of mainstream media outlets have another voice in mind, the top dogs of corporate America.
They just laid it out, and one said the Founding Fathers, the other said Donald Trump, and the other one said Jimmy Carter, but then they moved on to the corporate boardroom of America that's ultimately shaping morals. And in this article, they went on basically to attack capitalism because of the nature of that article, and that's not where we're going to go right now. But I am going to ask you, Alex, that's what they believe. I think that kind of ties in with the mentality of the Gallup poll, but from your perspective, does America have an identifiable moral standard today? Is there a defined set of moral criteria for America, or are we as a nation just truly guessing?
Wow, great question. We absolutely do. The United States of America absolutely does have an identifiable moral standard that was the impetus for the American Revolution, the philosophy behind the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the U.S. Constitution, and up through our history. And you know, it's not hard to find out what is the moral basis of America. Now, it's not pragmatism, what works, and it's not popular opinion, what gets the most votes. It's not corporate America, nickels and noses, money and votes. No, the moral standard of our country has always been that objective moral knowledge that all humans throughout history really do know. And let me make a distinction. Religion and morality are two different things. Religion is how you do your church or your synagogue or your worship. And the First Amendment is very clear that the government will not establish a national religion. Now, here's the dicey thing, and I want everybody to put their thinking cap on. Part of what makes our present age so tenuous and so dicey, and frankly, our freedoms are in a very fragile position right now, is because many people in academia, certainly in the media, in pop culture, platforms of leadership, many people assume and assert that if you invoke morality, you have established religion. Now, Alexander Hamilton, one of the writers of the Federalist Papers, talked about an immutable law of God written on the heart of all people. By the way, there was a man from my own home state, a man named Hugh Williams. He was born December 5th, 1735, and he went to England shortly after the Boston Tea Party, but before the beginning of the American Revolution. And, academics like to say that the American Revolution was not just, and I believe it was, but Hugh Williams went to England and spoke before Parliament and said, you have violated a standard that you really do know, God's moral standard, and we, the colonists, will rebel if you don't stop this taxation without representation, the Port Act, the Stamp Act, the Regulatory Act. Your taxation, your oppression of us is so immoral that we will answer to God if we don't respond to it. In other words, that's why they wrote appealing to God for the rectitude of our intentions. Now, all of that to say this, back to your original question. America's moral standard, the Founding Fathers cited it. The Founding Fathers were willing to die for it. In 1863, when Lincoln freed the slaves, he appealed to it. In 1948, Truman invoked it. JFK cited it. Ronald Reagan cited it. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. based his basis for the civil rights movement on it. It's the Judeo-Christian moral code, not that anybody invented, but that everybody knows and recognizes. Our moral epistemology has been God's moral standard written on the heart of all people.
And so, I think that kind of begs a question that Sam was kind of saying a little bit ago, and something I've experienced in classrooms and in Sunday school rooms, and that is that when you try to give, a list of things that we need to do, or here's my rules for my classroom, well, who are you to say that? And what's right, what's wrong? What is truth kind of questions. Mm-hmm. So is there a definition? It seems like when you look in the dictionary, the definition for morality is based on conduct towards others. What is a good definition maybe that we could look to for morality?
Great question. And let me say three things that morality is not. It's not something anybody invented. and it's not merely being tolerant, and it's not merely being nice. In the video clip, one of the people said that her moral standard was former President Jimmy Carter, and he's known universally as a very nice guy, and I'm sure he is, and I don't question that he loves the Lord. I believe that he does. But what morality is, the New Testament says the Gentiles who didn't have the law of the Jews intuitively, innately did the things prescribed by the law. You shouldn't lie, you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't bear false witness, you shouldn't adulterate and fornicate. In other words, all of humanity does the things that are specifically prescribed by the Ten Commandments. Now, C.S. Lewis wrote about this in his book, The Abolition of Man. Jay Budziszewski, a political science professor at UT Austin, has written about it. You know, I think about World Magazine, Marvin Olasky, PhD from Harvard, even when he was an atheist and he tried to defect to Russia in the 70s, he wrote about this universal moral law. Even there's an atheist writer that his name is Bruce Scheiman, and he wrote a book called An Atheist Defends Religion. Now, here's my point. Even atheists or secularists that are non-committal when it comes to matters of religion recognize that there is a universal moral knowledge. Now, to your question, people even in Sunday school will say, well, who gets to name the morality? I mean, whose morality? Nobody's morality. Nobody's, at least in the sense that no one human or group invented it. We recognize it. But it's God's morality. And I want to say this, I'll throw it back to you guys, but listen. The fact that there is objective right and wrong is undeniable because, look, parents raise their kids by it. Municipalities and governments judge crimes and cases with it. Nations and the world, the UN, Nuremberg, judge by it. There is this universal knowledge of right and wrong. We don't always follow it. We sometimes even try to suppress it, but it is undeniably, ubiquitously there nonetheless.
You know, Alex, that makes so much sense, that there's a universal knowledge. And so, Sam, on that universal knowledge, you look at a country like America, and what makes us different? You know, we used to have a moral compass, and it made us a great nation. So how do we see that just in our average citizen, the man on the street, as you referred to? How does that come out, his morality or lack thereof, or her morality or lack thereof, in just their everyday individual life?
Well, you know, I think Isaac, that when we just look at the news of the day, we've talked about school shootings on this program. We've talked about child abuse that we find out happening in homes. The breakdown of our families are all indications that, at least as Alex shared, is people, if they have that sense of morality in their heart, and I think we're made with that, we're not following it. And so I think that's part of the dilemma and why we're doing this program right now, America's moral compass, because no one who has any eyesight or ability to see can look at the news of the day, Isaac, without saying things are falling apart. And I submit they're falling apart because they can't define the moral standard, yet in their heart they know something's wrong.
That's so true. And you know, even the news of the day, I don't know, Alex, we have just a few moments here, but what standards does the media have that they should be living by? What part do they play in how we see morality?
Oh, great question. Well, the media has a responsibility to the population to fairly and accurately and truthfully report the news, which, as we all know, they don't always do. You know, Mortimer Adler, who was one of the editors of the Encyclopedia Britannica in the 50s and 60s, one of the most brilliant men of the 20th century, and he became a Christian before he died. But Adler wrote around 1960, he said, the great storm of propaganda that beats on the citizen 24 hours a day. And he was speaking of the news media in 1960. He said, democracy will fall to the loudest, most persistent propagandists, or the people must strengthen themselves to think morally, to think logically, and evaluate truth for themselves. And so here we are in the 21st century, and The pursuit of truth has been exchanged for the promotion of propaganda in far too many places.
That's so true, and so sad to see that happening. We're going to keep talking about this when we come back from our break. There's so many more parts that we could look to, but we see that there is a universal knowledge of morality, and that there's a responsibility to all parts of our society to uphold it. When we come back, we'll be looking at the original listing of morality and what we can lean on, our God-given moral compass, when we come back from this brief break.
Well, welcome back to Stand in the Gap, and you're watching this program today. Dr. Alex McFarland is our guest today, along with Isaac Crockett and myself. And we're on this theme of America's moral compass. Is it broken or just discarded? Alex, I want to bring you back into the program right now and ask you to go a little bit deeper on what we touched on in the last segment. And that is going back and saying, all right, what was our moral compass? You gave a good litany of presidents past who have referred to our moral standard. When we go back to the very founding of our country, the Pilgrims came, they gave us the Mayflower Compact, and then out of that came certain things, but that laid a foundation for who we became very clearly. Take and build out, if you could, be even more precise on the specifics of our moral code. Did our founders, as that one individual in that one clip we just showed said the founding fathers established our morals, what was it that they specifically cited? Did they happen to fall into what became our law system, or did they very purposely walk into it?
Oh, great question. You know, it's interesting, and this is what makes America so special in many ways. In one of my books, I wrote a book called 10 Issues That Divide Christians, and I wrote 2 chapters on American exceptionalism, not meaning that America is more deserving of God's blessing. In fact, I would argue that what we are deserving of in many ways is God's judgment. But American exceptionalism, the fact that we are different. And, you know, Sam and Isaac, I got a lot of pushback from Christians who have grown up in churches where it's a no-no to speak about politics or culture, which I think is unfortunate. But what made America unique, the Founding Fathers looked to many sources like John Locke. They looked to English law, a British common law that goes back to 1132. They looked at what's called natural law, and a lot of theorists like Montesquieu, I'm not pronouncing that correctly.
Montesquieu.
But yes, thank you. But do you know, in the Founding Fathers' writings, 3,154 times, think about this, 3,154 times they quote the Bible. Very interesting that overwhelmingly a Christian framework was their starting point for the basis not only of the American Revolution, but of our founding documents. In fact, of our 50 U.S. states, how many state constitutions reference God, truth, morality, Christianity? At least they reference God and what we call theism. Now, theism is the belief that there is a God, he's the creator, and God is the ground of moral reality. 50 out of 50 U.S. constitutions reference God and moral truth.
Alex, let me jump in on you here right now as we come to close to the program. I want to go specifically here. It was, I forget now, it was Noah Webster who actually said this, and he wrote the Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. He says, the duties of men are summarily comprised in the 10 Commandments, consisting of 2 tables, one comprehending the duties which we owe immediately to God, and the other, duties we owe to our fellow man. Are you describing, in essence, the 10 Commandments as a framework for society? Is it kind of summarized in that?
Absolutely, duties to God and duties to man. And the Founding Fathers were very much influenced by Augustine's City of God. Augustine lived 354 to 430, and in City of God, he talked about we have an allegiance to the city of God, but we have a responsibility to the city of man, not only to our Creator and the one who wrote his laws upon our heart, but to our fellow man. And part of the reason that we really, in the panorama of human history, we're so blessed to live in the United States of America is because we don't live in a country where it's a dictatorship or a monarchy or might makes right, but it was a representative republic that was predicated on a moral framework. Now, here's how we live it out today. This is what I say to gays, atheists, and Muslims when I do debates. They'll say, yes, but I'm homosexual and I want the right to marry. An atheist says, I don't believe in God and I don't want to have to see any religious references. Or a Muslim says, I want to swear the oath of allegiance of truth in a courtroom on the Quran. I'll say to gays, atheists, and Muslims, and just garden variety secularists, if you want to reject God, you can do that. I'm sorry for you, but if you want to reject Christianity, you can.
And Alex, I'm going to have to jump in. We're at the close of the program. Can you stay with us and let's continue this in the next program? Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Stand in the Gap today. I'm Sam Rohrer, and Isaac Crockett is with me today. Our special guest, Alex McFarland. We're talking about America's moral compass. We want you to come back with us and join in the second program. Next week we'll be airing, and we're going to talk about the cause. How did we get to a point where we moved from a defined moral compass to something which is now totally undefined and confusing? We're going to talk about that and solutions. And if you've been watching the program and you enjoy what you are seeing, could I ask you to look at the address on the screen at the end? Write to us. Let us know that Stand in the Gap is benefiting you and you're being helped by it. Hope to hear from you this week.